Hello and welcome everyone to this virtual fireside chat series on women in leadership hosted by the Boston Globe. I'm Beena Venkatraman. I'm the Globe's editorial page editor, and it's my delight to be hosting this conversation today. Before we start and introduce our guest speaker, who you're going to be very thrilled with hearing from, I am sure, I'd like to just introduce Chris Fursley from Ocean Spray, who is sponsoring this event, to say a few words about Ocean Spray.
Thank you, Beena, and thanks to the Boston Globe for hosting this event. It's great to be here. I'm Chris Fursley. I'm Director of Global Corporate Affairs and Communications at Ocean Spray, and we're thrilled to be presenting this event. You might be wondering, why Ocean Spray and women in leadership? And for some background, for those who don't know, Ocean Spray is a cooperative founded in 1930 by 3 farmers, one of which was a woman, on the very principle that we are stronger when working together. These 3 farmers knew they had a good thing each separately on their farms, but they knew by combining forces they could achieve something great. And that's what we find so special about this Women in Leadership series being brought on by the Boston Globe, and why we're so proud to sponsor an event here today that is bringing women together to make us stronger together and help each other and lift each other up. Without further ado, I'll give it back to Beena to kick us off.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. I'm going to welcome Lauren. Lauren Bush. Lauren is probably in the process of turning on her camera now. Zoom moment. Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
So I am thrilled that you were willing to have this conversation on women in leadership. So for anyone who hasn't already read Lauren's bio, she is the founder and CEO of Feed, and we're going to talk about what Feed is and what she does. But in a nutshell, Feed is a lifestyle brand that leverages its revenue to feed school children in vulnerable communities around the world. And Lauren and I met a few years ago. I've been impressed with her vision, her compassion, and her thoughtfulness as a leader. And so it's a thrill to be able to now take our conversation that we've started mostly around dinner tables into the realm of the public, and to share with all of the people who are tuning in today Lauren's insights. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for asking me, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. So you started Feed, I think it's in 2007, and it wasn't a sort of obvious career path for you to do that. So can you explain why you started Feed, where the idea came from, kind of what you were doing in your life beforehand?
Yeah, so I actually first sort of had the idea for Feed and the first feed bag when I was still a student in college. Starting as a sophomore, I had the amazing kind of eye-opening opportunity to travel around the world with the UN World Food Program. And for those of you who may not have heard of them, they just were awarded or announced they're going to be awarded the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize, which is amazing. And they're one of the largest humanitarian agencies in the world, literally feeding the world, feeding communities, feeding people, and really feeding a lot of children. And the program I saw on the ground that I really fell in love with was school feeding. So in some of the poorer countries around the world, they implement a school feeding program, which is what it sounds like. Kids go to school and are able to receive a free and nutritious school meal. And often that's the incentive for a lot of kids to go to school and stay in school and receive an education, or more of an education than they might have otherwise. So it's not only this amazing tool to ensure kids receive that proper nutrition they need, but it's really moving the needle on education, specifically girls' education, which we know is so important. So I would travel around the world, get funding from my college and university to go on some of these trips and go spring break, Christmas break, summer breaks, whenever I could, basically get out in the field. And at the time I really was so inspired, but I also felt this like extreme kind of frustration and didn't know what to do to engage others in this kind of massive world issue of world hunger. I think we all hear these crazy hunger statistics, especially now, even in our own country with COVID, and globally, like hunger is spiking and it's more of an issue than ever before. But I think because it's such a massive, massive problem, it's one that's very abstract and sort of easy to ignore because it is so overwhelming. And as an individual, especially a young person, I felt like, gosh, how can I engage my peers other young people and students in the fight to end world hunger in a way that's really, meaningful and tangible. And for me at the same time, I really love fashion and design. And I was also kind of toying with this other life path in design and moving to New York City and, learning that industry and that trade.
You were a model too, right? Was that how
I was modeling kind of throughout college as a side hustle and a, reason to, again, travel and be exposed to different things. So all these things combined, I just had this aha moment for the first feed bag as a way to combine my love for design, for, wanting to be some sort of entrepreneur, with also a way for people to engage in the issue of world hunger and give back in a really tangible and meaningful way. Unlike a lot of other massive global issues that we face, we know how to solve hunger. We know what it takes. It takes food, it takes nutrition. And you can actually quantify then that metric. So for every feed product we make and sell, mainly bags, there's a number on it, and that signifies the amount of meals that will be donated through the sale of that product. And also one reason I kind of had the aha moment, I was studying abroad in Australia my junior year of college, and everyone in Australia uses reusable bags. I think they banned plastic bags many, many years ago. I was there, gosh, now I'm dating myself, at least 15, 16 years ago. And I just was so impressed by that. It felt like such a no-brainer. And finally, New York City just implemented no plastic bags, or sort of a tax or fee for plastic bags. So America in general has been, I'd say, far behind in this kind of easy intervention to help the planet. So I had the aha moment in Australia for a bag, just thinking, gosh, what if we could help, create a brand, create a consumer product that gives back, but also do so with the environment in mind, in mind that we should all be using reusable bags instead of plastic bags, or, paper bags. And that's kind of where the initial seed of feed came from. And I'll stop there because I've been talking a lot, but we've been at it for 13 years now, and really proud because of partners, because of our amazing, consumers who want to do good through their consumer dollars. We've been able to give over 117 million school meals to kids globally.
Oh, you froze for a second there, Lauren, but I think we got the number. You're back. It was just a second, but
sorry. Okay, tell me if it happens again. I can
meals globally that you've now.
Yes.
Okay, so I would love to hear about the partners that you work with and sort of how the model works at all. But before we do that, I'm just so curious, some people get alive to a problem in the world, environmental problem, a humanitarian problem, and they might, go about it in a different way, right? They might either join a nonprofit that exists out in the world, or start a nonprofit, or maybe go work in government. Obviously, you have a history in your family of people going into government service. What kind of inspired you to go and say, no, there should be a for-profit model. Actually, there is a for-profit model to address this problem.
Yeah, at the time, honestly, I didn't know much better. I wanted to start a consumer goods company that gave back, in a very meaningful and tangible way. And in talking to kind of lawyers and accountants as I was going about doing that, my purpose was always, and still is, to support the giving partners on the ground. So support the UN World Food Program, support No Kid Hungry, who's our US partner, support Akshay Patra, who's our new India-based school feeding partner. So it wasn't to reinvent the wheel of what these great organizations are already on the ground doing and delivering food to kids. It was more to say, I believe there's a way to create something, an organization, a brand, a company that will help then funnel money back to these great organizations. So meals are ultimately given. And in doing so, and talking again to lawyers and accountants, they said, gosh, it really sounds like you want to be, basically a product company, a consumer goods company that just that is giving back in a significant way. And they really advised me to start Feed as a for-profit company. And it's really neat now because, I would advise anyone out there thinking of starting a social business. There's so many great resources. There's a B Corp sort of title, which now you can register for. We're in the process of doing that. And there's the world is sort of recognized more so, way more so than it did 13 years ago, that you can be a for-profit entity, but set out to do good for the world, whether that's giving back, whether that's making things more sustainably. Like there's many different ways of, doing that and having that really embedded as a core part of who you are as a for-profit company, which is really cool. And it's something I've been really inspired to, be a part of, but also just see kind of growing around me. So many young people want to go and be, entrepreneurs or pursue their passions in design or technology, whatever it may be, but also do it for the good of the world and have that really embedded for shareholders, for investors as a real meaningful way, to be a company today. So it's just a neat, the term, initially, right when I was starting was sort of conscious consumerism, and that movement, which has now parlayed very much into activism consumerism, where companies, like people, are kind of being, very much asked, what are your values? What do you stand for? What do you get behind? And consumers are very much either advocating for companies or, boycotting companies based on those values. So it's definitely been an interesting evolution, and it's something where companies can no longer sort of stand on the sideline and put out very neutral statements like you have to take a stand. And I think we've seen that more than ever this year. Which is
thinking about Nike taking on Colin Kaepernick when the NFL teams didn't want him, right? And using that, obviously, it drew in a lot of buyers for the brand, but it was also a way of sort of saying, we stand with this person who's kneeling, we stand with the principles that that debate, you're right, seems to be very live now in a way maybe it wasn't when you first started Feed. And it's also really interesting to hear that you are going to apply for benefit corporation status, which for anyone who's watching doesn't know, the idea that you have it's not just about your bottom line, but you're accountable to your shareholders for also meeting environmental and social criteria. It makes a lot of sense given your mission. But it kind of, now we know these brands, like we know Warby Parker, we know Tom's, right? You buy one pair of shoes, a pair of shoes is given. But at the time that you were starting Feed, I might have my timelines mixed up, but it seems to me there weren't a lot of these kinds of models and companies out there. And, maybe the word B Corp didn't roll off of people's tongues as much in the investment community. Wow. So what was that like for you? Kind of forging that terrain. Did you have a sense that you were doing something that other people weren't doing? Or was it?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And it's, 100%. I think initially in approaching even retailers or potential partners, people would always direct us to like the CSR person or department. When in essence, we're like, no, we want to talk to your buyers. We want to talk to your CFO, your CMO. We want to talk to your decision makers. We want to do business with you. And that business will essentially give back and support others. So it's been a real evolution. B Corp was not a thing. Even the term social business wasn't around. So the fact that this kind of way of doing business and approaching business for profit companies is just, very much evolved and is very much established. And, business schools like Stanford and Harvard are teaching students about social business and how to go about doing that, essentially starting a business, running a business, not just for the bottom line and for the benefit of shareholders, but for the benefit of the world. One of my favorite books for those of you out there, Muhammad Yunus, who's also won the Nobel Prize, a wonderful economist who came up with the idea of micro-lending in India, wrote a book about how to start a social business and basically defined what that was. So anyone who's interested in learning more, I really recommend his book.
That's great. I haven't read his book, but I wrote about him in mine. So I'm curious to read it and have followed his trajectory from that idea that started in Bangladesh with women, actually, like women entrepreneurs who he wanted to be able to give seed money to start businesses so that they could actually run viable businesses, to becoming this global phenomenon. But so I'm curious how you think about yourself as a leader with respect to being a woman and being a leader. do you think that, do you think there are ways that being a woman has helped you in founding and leading and building what you've built at Feed? Are there ways in which it's been a barrier? Can you just reflect, I guess, on what it means to you to be a woman leader?
I know it's funny, and we kind of were talking about this before this chat. Initially, when I was asked that question, I would have said no. I mean, very lucky to come from a country, a place, a community, a family that always said, you can dream big, you can get a great education, you get any job you want. So that was always my orientation, which is very lucky. But honestly, in starting to travel globally with the World Food Program, I wrote my thesis at university about kind of women's issues as they relate to the developing countries. Because what I found honestly so shocking as a woman in traveling to places like Chad and Lesotho and Cambodia and many different places around the world was that women were just clearly treated as secondary citizens. They weren't in charge of the family money. They couldn't, necessarily, not many didn't own land. Just very basic rights that, I would say took for granted growing up in America and in the situation I was in. So that was my first kind of eye-opening moment of like what it really means to be a woman in the world and to not take for granted all the amazing opportunities that I have, and what a responsibility then to pay it forward and make sure other women are treated more fairly and have access to something as basic as food to feed themselves and their families. I mean, it's very much proven globally that, not to bash men here, but it is a woman's forum, that if you give a woman money, she will make sure that money is used to feed her children, make sure children are educated and have the right clothing and necessities, and basically just take care of the family. And if you give that money to a man, that's really just not the guarantee, which is part of going back to Muhammad Yunus, why he would lend money to women to start businesses, because those women always paid it back like they were just a good investment because they were very responsible in general for taking care of their families. But basically when I started Feed, it never occurred to me, honestly, that, I was any different than male founders. But 5 or 6 years in, I started to see a lot of my peer companies who were started by, friends, male founders. They were raising money. They were doing things that I just hadn't thought to do. No one advised me to do. And I'm not saying that's because I'm a woman necessarily, but I do think the advice I was given early days instill and support as a woman is different than that of what I've seen kind of my co-male founders get. And I've certainly learned a lot, and I definitely didn't set Feed out to be this like massive venture capital, entity. So that was never my intention nor my want. But at the same time, I do feel like in a lot of meetings, if we're very honest, a lot of people I've met with sort of treat it like this nice little project, when in fact, my team, myself, like we work so hard, we care so much. And it's not a little project for me. It's, a lifelong dedication to the issue of hunger, but also very much, care about growing Feed, scaling Feed, making sure we as a business are set up for success. And you just kind of, as a woman, I'm sure you've experienced this, you just get a vibe in certain meetings. You're like, oh, you're not kind of taking this or me as seriously compared to, I'm sure, what would happen if I were a man sitting here asking for the same things.
Yeah, I would be lying if I said that never happened to me either. But it's interesting because you chose a field. I think, it's not just that it's an important project to you, it's a serious business with a serious social impact. And I'm curious if you can say more about that, because some of the audience members submitted some advanced questions. I'm going to get to them. I have so many, I will probably not get to them all. But about sort of the old boys club. And when I think about the field you entered, certainly that exists in journalism, certainly exists in places I've worked too, but to go into this area of really startup enterprises where I think, sort of in our generation, for a long time, the faces of startups and venture capital were all looked the same. And it was, I don't know if you want to call it an old boys or a young boys network,
Yeah,
because many times it's the young male entrepreneur.
yeah.
And so I'm curious for you, you know, did you see that happen? Like, did you see that happening with people who were doing things on similar trajectories to you? How did you deal with that? How did you face that?
Yeah, we've set out to raise money a few years back, and that was my first sort of entree. Basically, I started Feed on the little savings I had from modeling, actually coming out of college, and just grew it very slowly and conservatively. But then in wanting to open our first store and wanting to put some of these bigger things in place for Feed that I had dreamed of for so long, it really occurred to me that, okay, I really do need to raise money. And now, thankfully, because B Corps and things like that are so known and established, I was less nervous about, I guess, taking in capital that could change, you know, the intention, the purity of the intention behind Feed, which is something I, you know, find is super crucial. So went forth to raise money, and 100% every meeting I had, with the exception of one kind of women's fund, specific women's fund that was all run by women, invested in women, all the meetings I've had and all the investors I've had are men. And it's just, you know, it's definitely, I would say, an issue that's being looked at. It's been written about. It's being like addressed more openly than it was even 3 years back, or, you know, when I went out to raise money then. But there is a long way to go. There, you know, female founders are, you know, have proven like much harder time raising that capital. And yeah, it's just a bias that, you know, it does exist. And it's not just about money. I would say it's about getting the right advisors, the right, you know, people around you and around your company that really take it seriously. So I would say, because it's sort of more out in the open now that this is a problem, I know for myself and just from, you know, friends and female founders, it's becoming, easier to not only raise money, but also build that board and build, you know, those mentors and advisors who really take you and take your business seriously. So it's moving in the right direction. It's not there.
Right. Yeah. And I'm started to hear about these groups of funders. Pipeline is one of them. I think they have a more of an environmental bent, but of women who will fund women-founded, women-led ventures. And I think it's a really interesting way to think about our collective power as opposed to just individual women trying to change the system.
It always boggles my mind, because women make most of the family like purchasing. They have the most purchase power in this country. They're the ones buying for the family, buying for themselves, buying for their husbands, boyfriends, whatever. So as brands, as consumer brands, like, you're constantly thinking about that woman, and yet to not be that woman yourself and or not have investors and board members that are those women, it just seems silly. Like, it seems like we got to bypass some of these middlemen, no pun intended, and kind of get straight to the consumer and straight to the person that you're basically trying to sell to. And I think companies are stronger when that connection can be made, whether it's the founder, you know, whether it's the team, or whether it's meaning senior leadership and or board members and investors.
So I definitely want to get to asking you about how Feed's work has changed in the pandemic, since we are facing such an acute crisis of hunger in this country and abroad right now. But before we kind of toggle, I do have another question just about you and your history and how it connects to your leadership, because once we were breaking bread, we were eating, and you shared with me that you were a vegetarian, and we kind of did the opposite, because I was raised a vegetarian and became non-vegetarian, and you were raised non-vegetarian and became a vegetarian. And you told me the story about going fishing with your grandfather, of course, the late 41st president of the United States, and that kind of leading to your vegetarianism. I don't know if you want to say something about that, but the real question I have is, to what extent we know that in terms of feeding the world, that a plant-based diet is more sustainable, all those things. To what extent is your personal choices and the way you eat, how important do you think that is to your leadership or to what you do?
Yeah, such a good question. I forgot we had that conversation. Yes, so I would like to say it was like a very intellectual, informed decision. It was much more of a gut reaction. I was 5 years old. And firstly, we visited like a farm and you play with these animals and you love the animals. And then you go inside and you basically order the animals. And it just like couldn't, in my 5-year-old brain, I had a real hard time making sense of that. And then kind of a layer on top of that, I think maybe a few months later, I was fishing with my grandfather who loved to fish in Maine, and just seeing these like fish sort of writhing around and being clubbed, it just was too much. So it was, for me, it very much started as like an animal welfare, just couldn't do it type thing. I say that I wear leather, I eat eggs, like it's not a perfect situation. And then in getting older and really, becoming more educated about how bad for the environment the cattle industry is, and how much, more sustainable plant-based diet can be. And again, I'm not even a full-on vegan. Become more, I guess, proud about my choice and feel even better, even health-wise, about being a vegetarian. But it definitely didn't start in that place. But it's funny, I have two little boys, James and Max, in the debate, because my husband's not a vegetarian, but he is when he's with me, which is now all the time, given we're in lockdown together. But in having, our kids, it was like, do we make them sort of vegetarians from the get-go, and or let them come to that conclusion themselves if they want to one day? And we've said, we'll, give them meat now, but eventually I want to kind of educate them as to what that is and what that means for the world and the environment. And then whatever they choose. So they're not vegetarian. So our house isn't even like a pure vegetarian house, but I do a lot of the cooking for our house and ordering of food, etc. So, I'd say we're mostly there. But I think it's wonderful now that, Impossible meat, like I don't even actually love meat or fake meat that pretends to be meat, but it's like really cool now that there's a ton of different solutions for folks who maybe like the taste of meat or want that experience, but, would, want to do good by animals or for the environment, et cetera, and want to eat more plant-based.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of those
in the right direction.
Right. The Impossible Burger. It's actually quite like a burger.
I tried it once and I was like, oh no, too real.
Too similar for you, right? I think your aversion is to meat in the first place. It doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. And it almost reminds me of the way that some people think of introducing religion to their kids, or right, like giving your kids like the options, giving them the values and giving them the options and guiding them in a way.
Yeah. So I didn't want them to, like what you did maybe, is rebel against and then go to like loving meat.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a lover. This is like going way off track. We got to get back. But basically, I went to Cuba. I was studying abroad in Cuba when I was in college. And it was just impossible to not go to a person's house and eat whatever they were offering. And if you just took the rice and beans, it would still have pork, because that would be how they got or used their protein ration for the day. Yeah. So it just sort of became a transition, and I'm very selective about it for mostly reasons of climate change and sort of broader sustainability. But I do, now I like it, and I do cook.
It is very hard. I studied abroad in Spain when I was in high school and literally lost like 10 or 20 pounds, because it's, most cultures, like meat is like part of everything. And they, it is a luxury to be we choose and have healthy options. I definitely recognize that.
Right. Yeah. And so to that point, I think, we are in a situation of extreme. I think we already had, a high degree of food insecurity in the US, particularly for being the wealthiest country in the world, the most developed, advanced in technology in the world. And now here we are. Not only are we the epicenter of the pandemic, but we are also a country that has seen more and more people becoming hungry. And obviously it's happening, and the economic crisis is affecting families around the world. So I'm just curious, how has your work at Feed changed to kind of respond to and react to all of this hunger that results from this pandemic?
No, I mean, we're just, it definitely has gotten so much worse. I mean, so many families in America who, never had to visit a food pantry or soup kitchen to get by are, in these sort of mile-long car lines to pick up food now. And it's really staggering. So, and it's also, I would say families, I think the stat is families with kids under 12 are sort of doubly at risk of being food insecure in this moment. Often, so many kids rely on that free and nutritious school lunch or breakfast, and with schools being closed, there are definitely like pickup sites for those lunches and meals, but it's not always easy to get to for families. And, we definitely know a lot of families, and specifically families with children, are going without. So we started about 6 years ago. We definitely started initially globally, giving primarily just through the World Food Program. But we started about 6 or so years ago, also giving significantly here in the US. And our main giving partners are No Kid Hungry and Feeding America. So Feeding America is like the largest network of all, major food banks are connected to Feeding America, and then all like smaller soup kitchens and food pantries, ladder up to these bigger food banks. I'm also I joined the board of the Food Bank for New York City about 3 years ago. So digging in locally where I live in New York. And then No Kid Hungry does amazing work helping get primarily in school. It's changed now with COVID, and again, a lot of schools being closed, but working to ensure that kids who are qualified and needing that free school lunch also can get a free school breakfast and take home, weekend meals. Also summer meals is such a kind of gap for so many families and so many kids. And yeah, the need here is just so much greater because of unemployment, because of COVID. And it's really, a shame that on top of worrying about getting sick or trying to keep yourself and your family healthy, so many families are just, literally consumed with like, well, what are we going to eat? How do we make ends meet? And even before COVID, the trade-offs that families make between, do we buy groceries or can we pay our rent? Do we buy groceries? Do we go to the doctor? Like those real necessities that people have to trade off literally just to put food on the table. So I really recommend anyone listening who wants to get involved, checking out their local food bank, certainly, but also Feeding America and No Kid Hungry, who are just giving out grants, left, right, and center right now, to organizations and groups on the ground who are, providing those meals and helping kind of meet this gap and this need in this time.
Yeah, as you talk about that, I'm remembering the work of, there's a Boston Medical Center physician researcher named Deborah Frank, who's done this work on the heat-eat trade-off. And as we're facing this particular pandemic winter, they found studying the babies born, 9 months or when the mothers were pregnant during winter, that the families were actually trading off nutrition for heating, and that they could see a real effect in the birth effects and the development of the children. So we're like right there as we go into winter in the Northern Hemisphere. So can you say more about your strategy at Feed and whether it's changed? I mean, is it just to try to get as much help to these organizations as possible, knowing that the magnitude of the problem has increased, or is it something that you think you have to approach differently because of the pandemic?
I mean, definitely the strategies of our giving partners on the ground has pivoted. So where, I mean, it's interesting. So from like a New York City perspective, Hurricane Sandy occurred many years ago, and it's like a one-time event. It's horrible. And people are displaced. Many people were displaced and needing emergency food support. And there you could kind of set up these like pop-up, emergency response food centers and just hand out food. In an ongoing pandemic, you don't want people gathering. That's not good. So how do you do these food distributions safely? So they've been doing pop-up like at Barclay Center and Lincoln Center, these big places, but everyone has to be spread out. And there's just so many more protocols. And even on the news yesterday, I was watching the news, and they showed, I think it was Houston, where I'm from, Texas, and just a 5-6 mile like car line to literally get a box of food like put in people's cars. So here in America, a lot of these food banks and soup kitchens are powered by volunteers. That isn't, necessarily safe right now. So a lot of the workforce that these organizations relied on has, had to pivot and change to be scaled back so everyone can stay, 6 feet apart and be safe in terms of even packing up the food to give to folks that need it. And again, the school meals that so many globally, how that's happened is take-home rations. And oh gosh, can you guys hear me? My internet.
Yeah, it did go out for a second, but we got you back. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Work
That's
from
all
home.
right. Yes,
The peril
exactly.
of work from home.
Yeah.
I was saying globally, how that's happening is instead of pivoting, the schools are still getting meals, but instead of preparing it at school and obviously giving it to a horde of kids at school, it's become take-home rations. So they're, instead of cooking it at school, they're divvying it out to the families who then either go to school, or maybe there's like a local delivery system happening. So basically a lot of the school meals, the kids would normally receive in a cafeteria or, wherever they're going to school, it's pivoted to just take-home meals. But from Feed, in terms of our business and strategy, thankfully we were mainly an online company to start. So that hasn't, our business has been impacted, but it online, it hasn't, which is the bulk of it. We do have a store in Brooklyn where I just was this morning. That's really slow. We've had to cut hours, cut days to make it make sense and to stay open in the long run. So we're giving it a try, but we were closed from March until, September, which is brutal. And just, so many small businesses, we were lucky to get some support. But it's just hard. It's just really, it's a tough time to be a small business. I think anywhere, but, I'm confident we will weather the storm and come out stronger. And we've used this time to kind of get our operations a bit better. Like we're focusing on things that can make a difference and move the needle for our customers and for our product. We're working a lot on sustainability right now, which was some priority before the pandemic, but this moment of pause has sort of given us a bit more time, I would say, to focus and move that forward more aggressively. And I'd say kudos to my team. If anyone's watching, they've done a really awesome job adjusting to the work from home and the Zooming and the Slacking and everything that, everyone's had to adjust to. So I personally miss, and I think all the women on my team, so the whole team is women, which isn't by design, but it just is right now. And I would say there's a noticeable difference, which I'm sure is top of mind for a lot of people on the Zoom. The women on my team, like myself with kids, that work from home situation is just night and day different than often for the women on my team who don't have kids. And that's not to say, us moms out there, we're doing our best, but it's more of a juggle. It's more distracting. I think I do know all the women on my team who have kids, we all miss the office. I think in the office setting a lot more than even the women who don't have kids, who can have that peace of mind and headspace during the day to work and do what they need to do. And it's just been so disheartening to read all these articles about, so many women affected, during this time who've, because of homeschooling, because of, a plethora of reasons, have really taken on the burden of taking care of their families even more than they do normally, which is a lot. And had to quit work. And I really think for all the progress that women have made over the last many years, I've, see the situation this year as a major setback for women in that regard.
Absolutely. I almost feel like there can't be enough journalism about that. You're reminding me how much I want us to track this over time too, as an editorial team, as an opinion team, because I think the fallout from that and leaving the workforce, they're, having, sort of steps back in their career is going to be serious. It's almost like, people always talk about we need a new deal now. I almost think that we need a stimulus that's going to be targeted specifically at women in a way that previous economic recovery didn't contemplate. So an idea I'm chewing on.
Interesting. Yeah, I like
we
it.
have a lot of questions for you from, and some of them came in advance. And I will say, well, one thing that has come in during the chat is that people wanted you to repeat the name of the Muhammad Yunus book.
Oh, sure. It's How to Build a Social Business.
How to Build a Social Business by Muhammad Yunus, who was the Nobel Prize winner for the Grameen Bank. Okay, so one of the questions that came in was, how does your process look like for vetting new ideas?
Feed, we're a fairly smallish team, so it's a very collaborative environment. Also by design, I want everyone's, every opinion and every person on my team, I want their ideas to be heard. I would say if it's a partnership, it's really vetting, if that partner and that brand is a good fit for Feed and on brand for us. New ideas in terms of product, it's sort of looking at what's currently selling well and what customers may be asking for. I mean, it's really neat now with social media. You can have like a true dialogue with your customer base in a way that, is more possible now than ever before. So we really lean heavy into those kind of free community building tools in terms of not only understanding here's what I think and what I want, which I think is always a big part of it for myself and my team, but also really what does our consumer want? What is she asking for? What products would appeal to her? And really thinking first and foremost about that as well. And again, using social media as a tool to kind of continually have that back and forth. Again, Slack has become like a wonderful tool just to like quickly throw out an idea and get reactions and, just bounce things off. And then obviously everyone now is Zooming constantly and, chatting ideas out that way.
Do you have designers or do you have like multiple designers pitching new ideas? How does it work for you when you have like a new product that you might develop?
Yeah, so we have exactly 2 designers and sort of a production person, and they at first kind of concept generally the look and feel of the season, like a mood board, inspiration pictures, which I then kind of give feedback on. And then it's down to our merchant giving basically a line plan saying, we want, we need this many pouches and this many bags, this much leather and this much canvas. And then we kind of scrutinize that. And then the designers then design into what that line plan is. So it's very collaborative and creative and very much mixes the design, creativity. Here are the fabrics we're seeing that are really cool right now and the colors that we really think are neat, and and then the merchant kind of coming up with what is that buy and line plan in order to all laddering up to our financial goals for a particular time. So it's very much like a marriage of science and art, which is really fun to be a part of. And all that, going through the filter of what's on brand for us, and what, will appeal to our customer.
Great. So there were a number of questions sort of on the theme of what advice you have, particularly what advice you have for young women interested in leadership roles, advice to women who are discouraged or on the verge of burnout right now. I mean, you spoke a little bit to that in terms of juggling motherhood.
Yeah.
I think people kind of just want some of your insights about that.
Oh gosh, I feel like it's such a work in progress for myself. But I guess firstly to, advice for women kind of seeking leadership roles. I mean, really, be an advocate for yourself. I would say set goals. And I do think there's a really wonderful way of advocating for yourself and being really clear and honest with maybe the powers that be or the higher up about here's where I want to go in my career. Here are things I want to learn. Here's responsibilities I want to take on. I know for myself in leading a team, if they're proactive people on my team who are who really know what they want and are eager to learn more and take on more, those are the people that thrive, especially in obviously a smaller environment like ours. They're constantly being given more responsibility, and with that, more leadership, bigger titles, etc. And also really, I mean, I've been privileged and lucky to have great mentors. So I think it's important not only, just for your own like career development and self-development, to find those people around you that who've been there and done that to some extent and can kind of help be those sounding boards. And those people may change throughout the years. I found that, certain people come in and out at the right times when I'm meeting them. And I've just been so blessed to have those mentors. So really, I would say purposefully, seek out at least one or two mentors that you can call on when you're struggling, who kind of coach you through certain situations with people, with, whether it's business strategy or whether it's just interpersonal office, team dynamics. That's, super, super important. I think that's something I didn't realize until I was a few years in with Feed, and that's been really helpful. And then just advice for women and burnout. I mean, I think it's like a very tough time right now. And, any way that you can take care of yourself and be kind to yourself. I know so many of us are kind of type A achievers. And if you're not giving your all at work, it just feels horrible. And I know right now for me, I'm certainly trying hard, but some days I don't get it all done and it's not done the way I want. And I think I've learned in the last 6 months just to be more kind to myself and be more accepting of my limitations and, what I can do in order to be, present for work, but also very much present for my kids who need me and who are very much like physically present during work, which isn't normally the case. And I think also just seeking out support. I mean, I'm here on Zoom with you because I have a nanny, thank God, watching my son right now. If you're able to have that support, and so many parents I know are doing in a safe way, like pods where you're sharing childcare, like finding those safe ways right now to also get your kids socialized, which for me was a big thing. For many months, they only saw each other and us, and that felt very insular and not great for their development. So I think going into the sort of second wave that we're in, figuring out what are those safe situations if your kids aren't, in school right now, but also to give yourself a relief and headspace and time to take care of yourself and to work and do what you need to do. So I don't know. I don't have much advice beyond that. I think it's really hard.
I think it's just useful even for me, as I hear you say that you're struggling with it and you have days where you don't feel like you've succeeded. Like, I think it's just good for all of us because we're working in our own isolated pods, for those of us who to understand that everyone feels like they're failing all the time. I just felt myself kind of like relaxed hearing you say that because I feel it too. And it's really hard. And I'm curious for you, the time has been flying, but one thing for me as a leader, just thinking about leading in the era of Zoom and the pandemic and the level of stress, the level of, for us, it's, like covering the election, covering the pandemic,
oh my God.
racial justice reckoning. Like, so it's just the inundation of what's happening in the world, in how it's fits right along with our work. And in your case too, hunger, right? With hunger on the rise, it's like right of a piece with your work, but also just in terms of leadership and how you guide people and how you know and check in with your team when you don't see each other in person. And I found that one thing about this reality is I almost have less time to be self-critical. Like everyone's just going to see what's going on in my life. Like now you see the bookshelf, but sometimes you're just chaos and construction next door. And, you know, and in your case, your kids, right? Like I could hear your kids at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
And I just wonder for you, I mean, maybe you've always been that authentic and casual, or like willing to let people in to see what's going on in your life. But like, has that been an experience you've had, and how has that affected your leadership? Do you think it helps with your team? Do you think it hurts? Do you think?
I know. It's hard because I feel like initially for us, we weren't zooming enough. Like we weren't getting at least some FaceTime. And then we kind of, the pendulum swung to zooming too much and feeling like you're just like stuck, you know, zooming. So I do think for a leader right now, it's figuring out for your team and yourself, like, what is that right mix of, hey, we don't need to Zoom this one. We can like get on a phone call quickly or we can just do this by Slack. And then what do we really need to at least, you know, we do at least a team meeting. We have a leadership meeting. We have like a full team meeting at least once a week where everyone's on Zoom. You kind of see each other. You can check in that way as well. I mean, I think what's missing now is that more interpersonal kind of chit chat that just organically happens when you're in person, and also ideation and new ideas. I do feel a loss of that and miss that. And I think as a leader, personally, I've been trying to figure out how to facilitate more of that in a really organic, not forced way, which is hard on Zoom because you Zoom for a purpose. You don't necessarily Zoom unless it's like your parents or whatever to just catch up. So you have to be more purposeful, I found, about those catch-ups that do lead eventually to great strategy and great ideas and kind of the hashing out of problems. But they don't just organically happen the way they would in an office place if you're physically with people. So I do think it's about being more intentional with your time and creating those forums for kind of open discussion in a way that a lot of Zooms and virtual things don't allow for.
Yeah, I hope that if any of the brilliant women watching have an idea of how to recreate those spontaneous interactions, that they send it to us. That is what I miss the most too. It's just the moment where you're with one or two other people and the sparks fly, and it happens on the fly. You don't know when it's going to happen. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, because a lot of people did have questions, you know, related to you're coming from a political family, but I had a question sort of that maybe encapsulates a few of the questions, which is just really about, you know, obviously your grandfather was the 41st president, your uncle was the 43rd president, another uncle was the governor of Florida. You come from a political family, from, you know, a Republican political family, for the most part. I guess I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, you know, you chose a life outside of politics, but obviously interacts with the political arena. How you reflect or how you think about this moment of political division in the country. It's a big question, but you know, what it means for you, having been able to live and see part of what different kind of political leadership can look like.
I know it's been a moment, I think, for everyone, a real reckoning for our country. And for me personally, it has been maybe even a little more disheartening because, you know, I grew up, my grandfather was my idol and, you know, a real example to me of what gentlemanly, you know, thoughtful, rational leadership looks like. And kind of living through the past 4 years and seeing not only the leader we've had, but also just the great division that's happened in this country, you know, this past election that's ongoing-ish. Being a prime example of that has just been heartbreaking. And clearly there's a lot of hurt and a lot of misunderstanding in this country. A friend of mine started a podcast. He's sort of a on the ground organizer who goes to a lot of places, mainly in kind of the middle of the country. And he talked about this kind of idea of deep canvassing. So having these, the need for and call for not just like talking at each other and spewing ideas, but really having that deep dialogue, because there is so much anger. I mean, I voted for Biden, proudly, very excited with the outcome of the election. I posted on Instagram even the day, you know, of the election and said, here's why I'm supporting Biden. and the level of sort of hate, and I'm not in politics. Obviously I come from a political family, but these are just my own personal views. They weren't my family's views necessarily. And just so many like hateful comments and this anger, like an anger from both sides, quite frankly.
My world, by
that
the way.
Was really,
Every
what is it?
I said, welcome to my world, by the way, every editorial.
I know, totally. I'm like, but, and I knew that in posting it, but it still was like, it still hits you that you're like, wow, it's just still like so much anger and
it's
division.
personal. Yeah. Yeah.
It is personal, and people are, feel seriously on both sides. Like we have to really look at that and see that. And a few days later, actually my sister surfaced and sent me this beautiful letter my grandfather had written to Bill Clinton when he was leaving office. So he left it for him in the Oval Office for Bill Clinton when he was, taking over as president. And it just was, he said, like, I'm rooting for you. Like, I believe in you and I am excited for you, and stay the course and don't get discouraged. And it was like this very hopeful, beautiful letter of saying, you are president now. Like, they had a bitter election. My grandfather, was very upset, obviously, to lose, and no one likes to lose. But he, took it upon himself in that moment to leave this really heartfelt letter, which I think then led to just this wonderful friendship between them. And it's just sad because, some of my grandfather's best friends were Democrats. Like, he worked with everyone. And I really hope, for the sake of our country, for the sake of our sanity, we can get back to a place where there is that just general respect and dialogue and common decency, common values of what it means to be an American. And I think the discrediting of, I'm talking to the Boston Globe, so you guys get it, the discrediting of like what is factual, and having kind of people swirling around and questioning what news source to believe or not believe, in the spewing of lies as well. It's very disillusioning and it's very dangerous. So I'm really hopeful that in the next few years we can kind of get back to a place where there's at least a common values, common language, common facts that we can, at least agree to that, and then really go into that deep canvassing, kind of deep listening phase of trying to understand where each side is coming from. I think there's a lot of healing to be done, no matter, who won the election, et cetera. We all have a lot of work to do.
Thank you for using your voice and your leadership and to kind of stand for that and to engage with that. And thank you so much. I wish we had much more time, but this has been an extraordinary conversation, and you're the perfect person to kick off this series between the things you've done in your career and the way you've led as a woman and the way that you're thoughtful about the crises we're facing right now. So thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be asked and honored to be with you guys today.
It was a delight. And I'm going to invite Chris Fursley to come on just again for a closing note. And I just want to thank everyone so much for tuning in.
Thanks, Dina. Thanks, Lauren. I know we're out of time, so I'll keep it short, but wow, I'm so inspired after this conversation. I just want to get back to work and see what we can do to continue to make an impact. Lauren, your comments reminded me of a motto we had when I was at the Obama team, which is the importance of doing well by doing good. And what I think that really ties to at the end is empathy. Bringing empathy to business can help solve those problems of double-edged swords, like the hunger versus obesity, like the division we're seeing. If we all try and maybe reflect and start from a place of empathy moving forward, I do think great things can happen. And we are so happy to have been able to present this event today. And thanks to everyone for joining.